been following the news, well, okay, let me just give you a rundown of what we're gonna do. I'm gonna do a little masking because I just felt like masking. It's Sunday afternoon and I have this beautiful cup of coffee here, and I have the mask I'm making for Face Mask Alchemy for September, and it's just divine, and I feel like just painting it on right now and chit-chatting with you about the hurricane that we just went through. And by the way, I think I told you about this macadamia nut milk that I've been obsessed with, but now I'm gonna mix up my mask with it. Can't even wait. I'm not gonna give you a hint about the mask, except that there's gonna be something in the box that I've never done before. Well, not that I've never done, but I've never featured. So there's gonna be a new feature in this coming box. All right, so most of you know that when we had a bomb scare here, it was a nuclear missile from North Korea scare. I didn't get too worked up, right? Because the sirens hadn't gone off. And so I don't normally get very worked up because we face hurricanes warnings all the time. We get a lot of rain. And but this particular storm, like, here's the thing about Hawaii is that if you look at where we sit on the equator, even though we're closer to the equator than most of the United States, besides Florida, we still are far enough north of it that usually we don't have, I mean, usually hurricanes will die out before they get to us because the water actually gets colder. So, this mask is smelling with the mac nut milk. I mean, I don't know. Gosh, I mean, I say this every month. I was like, oh, this one's my favorite. This one's my favorite. But this one is very, like, sensory. You'll see when, if you're subscribed, you'll see when you get it. It has a very fragrant component. Okay. So, I don't know what it is about this one, but it was not backing down. I mean, it was even up until Wednesday afternoon at 2 or 3 o'clock. It was a category 5. And if you were looking at the trajectories, it was pretty scary. And it's funny because I grew up here and I was talking to other friends that, you know, that have lived here their whole lives too, and it was kind of like we were just all really nervous about this one. And I think it was the way that, you know, the county, like the governor had already with the federal government declared FEMA like a disaster, like everything was shutting down, you know, the schools were shutting down, the county of Maui, the mayor was making an announcement like, if you're not preparing, then you're being selfish, like you need to be prepared for this hurricane, you need to board your windows, you need to have 2 weeks worth of food, 2 weeks worth of water. And it was just a really interesting phenomenon, to be honest. It was really scary because, like I said, the storm wasn't backing down, and just you could tell all the people who had contact to the people, you know, doing the weather models were scared. And so it was just, I don't know, you know, we had our 2 weeks worth of water. And so then fast forward, right now we're 4 days out from Wednesday afternoon, and the storm kind of went towards the Big Island, which is the southernmost island, dumped 40 plus inches of rain on them, and then kind of hung out in this spot and then died out. And I mean, I literally, like, I feel like we dodged a bullet. And it was a very, very hard last couple of days because we're just waiting. We're all watching, because the thing was, like, the way the trajectory of the hurricane was, you could foresee that if things went wrong, it could make landfall. And like, I lived here on Oahu in 91 when Hurricane Iniki touched down on Kauai. And if you look back on the pictures of the damage that it did, it flattened Kauai. And so, I mean, it was just a very, my husband was so stressed out. My husband is so mild-mannered, but my husband just had this like underlying anxiety, just like, you know, the kids could sense it, and we can't go anywhere because they don't want you to leave the house. They want you to stay off the roads. You know, everything is closed. And so, you know, now fast forward to Sunday afternoon after, you know, because we live on this gulch. And so this whole entire time, I knew that if it started raining like it was raining on the Big Island, then this gulch could come up, like it could rise, and who knows what it could do, what kind of damage it could do to the place that we live in. And, you know, first they thought the rains were gonna come Thursday night, and then they thought the rains were gonna come Friday night. And I just was like freaked out that we were gonna go to bed and wake up and like half of the house had been ripped off, and I don't know. So now we're on the other end, and everybody's like going through this like, sort of decompression after a stressful event. Like you're seeing your friends like at church and CrossFit, and everybody's like talking about how they prepared and if they felt they over prepared or under prepared. And it's just, I mean, I'm sorry I'm going on so much about it, but I figure maybe you're interested because I know a lot of you kind of were sending me messages, and you know, you were following along. And anyway, whew. But it's funny because like now that people prepared and nothing happened, people kind of have this sense of like irritation, right? That like, oh, you know, it was like the hurricane that cried wolf. But it keeps reminding me of when people, you know, like at my work, when I have to send people to the ER, and they go and nothing happens, or they're like, everything's fine, and they're sent home, and they're like kind of angry they had to go to the ER and spend time there and pay their ER copay. And you're sitting there and you're kind of like, well, you had all the symptoms of something serious, and so when you get to the ER and they tell you nothing's wrong, you pat God on the back and you say thanks. So it's kind of how I've been feeling about the hurricane. I'm kind of like patting God on the back and saying, you know, I don't really care that we've prepared, and you know, we had to spend extra money to buy extra food and all of this stuff. I'm just like so thankful that because literally a category 4 or 5 winds and rains on Maui, like just. So now I'm gonna rinse this off, and then I want to talk about this hydration article that Cheryl from the Free Range Diva sent me. So let me go, I'm gonna let this sit for a few more minutes and then I'll come back. Okay, so I'm back. Now I wanted to talk about this article, and I actually filmed this video last week, but I really didn't like the way it came out. So I thought I would talk about it now because I had more time to reflect on it. So the article is published in this online publication called Domino, and I have my computer screen right here, and so I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to kind of be looking back and forth, okay? And then I'm going to try to flash some bits of the article up here for you to see it, and I'm going to kind of go through it step by step and talk about it. And then, yeah, I just thought it would be kind of like a fun stimulus piece. And actually, I've talked about a lot of these things in my Skin Goals Hydration, which is like a series in Monday Mixed Plate. And I also have 2 skin unis or skin universities on the dermis and the epidermis. So if you really wanted to get into detail in that, you could. But let's go through the article, and the title of it is called "No Drinking Water Does Not Do This for Your Skin." So Cheryl, like I said, from the Free Range Diva, sent this article over to me, and I'll link it below, of course. And so let's kind of go through the article. It's written by a woman named Kristen, and she says, "It's time for some real talk. We need to debunk a very common water myth once and for all. I always get frustrated when I read an interview with a well-respected expert and he says something along the lines of, 'Drinking water is so important for my skin feeling hydrated,' or 'my skin is so dry when I don't drink enough water.' But that's not how our bodies work. Drinking water does not give you more hydrated skin." Okay, so before we jump in, let me just tell you the gist of my reflections on this article. and they make some really good points, some really good conversation pieces. That's why I want to talk about it. But what they mean when they say drinking water does not do this for your skin is, let's take a look at the anatomy of skin. So skin is 3 parts. It's the epidermis, which is what you touch. It's the dermis, and it's the subcutaneous layer, or the fatty area. Now, if you look here, okay, at the dermis, you will see that the dermis has something that the epidermis does not. And that is that the dermis is vascularized, meaning that it has blood flow. It contributes oxygen and nutrients to the tissues as well as fluid, because fluid exists in the tissues in 3 spaces. We have fluid in the blood, we have fluid in the cells, and we have fluid in the intercellular space. So exchange or diffusion is happening all the time in the dermis. Now, if you look at the epidermis, the bottom layer is the only thing touching the epidermis that receives any type of that like fresh, fluid nutrient exchange. Now, the epidermis has all its own things going on up there, but it's not vascularized. So when you drink a glass of water, you're not hydrating the epidermis, you're hydrating the dermis. So if you look online, everyone says what they say, except that pretty much what they're all referring to is the epidermis. And that's why, is because when you drink water, the epidermis is not vascularized. However, the dermis is. That's my initial response to this article. But like I said, they make a lot of other great points. And the other thing is that you will see what they've said repeated over and over and over again, which is that drinking water doesn't contribute to skin hydration. But what we know, just from looking at the anatomy, and remember, I'm a nurse, okay? So just from what we know of looking at the anatomy is that drinking water does contribute to the hydration of the dermis, which is where collagen lives, which is where hyaluronic acid lives, which is where elastin lives. So yes, drinking water doesn't contribute to touching your skin feeling hydrated, but it does contribute to the hydration of the skin. So that's just a little like straight talk. That's some straight anatomy talk. Now let's get into the rest of the article, because like I said, they make some great points. So we have another quote here. How much water you drink has pretty much zero relation to the level of hydration of your skin, meaning the epidermis, right? So dry or dehydrated skin is either a genetic thing or it's an external factor. Now that's a really great point, because part of that is really true. They know with conditions like eczema, psoriasis, I know myself, I'll talk about this in the later part, diet has really contributed to my kind of healing my dry skin. So that's one thing that they know, like in some of these skin conditions, that there's a breakdown in some part of the chain of making the strong lipid barrier, right? Which is what we're touching when we touch a stratum corneum, which is our strong lipid barrier. So then they go on to quote a doctor, and I find it interesting that she says, not necessarily twice, because obviously she's functioning from a level of anatomy, right? So she says, although there is a great amount of anecdotal information that drinking a significant amount of water will rid your body of toxins and thus make your skin appear healthier, water that is drunk does not necessarily travel directly to your skin, says plastic surgeon Dr. Melissa Doft. Although it is true that the skin cells appear smoother, more hydrated when they are plumper secondary to a higher water content, it is not necessarily due to ingested water. Now again, take what she says, right? So what she says is really great in that, remember, drinking water is going to hydrate the dermis, it's going to hydrate all the tissues, it's going to help the lymph system drain toxins, help the blood remove things. But then let's go back to the anatomy of the dermis, because what she's saying is also a fabulous point, is that ingested water is not going to make this topical area that you're touching feel hydrated. But the anatomy again explains why. So if you look down here at the epidermis, you'll see that the basal layer is touching the dermis. Now, these cells down here have about 80% water. But as they rise through the epidermis, they start to lose water, and that's actually on purpose. As they start to lose water, they become better and better at doing their job of being skin, which is to waterproof us. And not only that, when they reach almost the top, they actually go through a programmed cell death and they start spilling the liquid from inside their cells. And by the time the cells that you're touching right here have about 10% of water left in them. And that is actually on purpose. So you have almost dead skin cells held together by a fatty layer. And what that's designed to do is to, protect your skin from invaders, from moisture, from, topical things you might apply to it. So really, that's not a bad thing that drinking water doesn't end up here, okay? So, of course, they kind of jump into selling you hydrating products. They try to make a couple more points about how drinking water doesn't hydrate your skin, but I'm not even going to touch on that because we've already established that the dermis is vascularized, meaning that your hydration level will affect that layer of skin. And not only that, like, have you ever had diarrhea really bad, like you got food poisoning? If you were to go into the ER and you needed hydration, they would do something on your skin called a turgor test. And so you can see my skin right now is pretty well hydrated. Well, if you were to do a turgor test on somebody that's super dehydrated, the skin doesn't bounce back. So it's more complicated than just saying drinking water doesn't hydrate the skin. What we should say, or what you should keep in mind, is that these layers out here that we're touching, drinking water doesn't hydrate that. But like we know, it's more complicated. But that's when we jump into the hydrating products. Okay, so one of the things that they jump right into trying to talk to you about and selling is a hydrating toner. Now we know I love hydrating toners. And what are hydrating toners made up of? Humectants usually. Humectants are things that draw moisture from the air to your skin. These are a great way to bring hydration to the skin because as you apply them, they sit on the face and draw water there and hold water to the skin. So they definitely make these cells right here feel hydrated. Then they jump into serums. And of course, the number one thing that they bring up is hyaluronic acid. Now, one of the things I mentioned last week, I was on the chemist corner where chemists hang out. There was somebody asking a question about making a hyaluronic acid niacinamide serum. And they were saying, does any of this actually penetrate the skin? And Perry Romanowski, the guy that puts together the chemist corner, commented that he didn't really think that it did. He didn't really think that any of these things were able to penetrate the skin. However, I love hyaluronic acid serums, and usually they're coupled with humectants, so I don't know. I feel like there is some research out there that it works, but you definitely want to get a good one that's paired with humectants. So anyway. Okay, so moving on. Now we get down to some of the things that I talked about in my Skin Goals Hydration series in my Monday Mix Plate. And one of the things they mentioned is eating water-rich foods. This is so key because our body doesn't just need water. Our body needs all the other electrolytes that come with water. So that's why eating things like cucumber, salads, like even if you drank 8 to 9 glasses of water a day, but you only ate like cheeseburgers, like you're not gonna feel that sensation of hydration. And down here in the article, she quotes Dr. Charles Passler. These food sources of water also contain minerals and other nutrients that help your skin absorb the water. So then he also goes on to say, healthy plump skin requires healthy dietary fats, making sure you consume a wide variety of nuts, seeds, and avocado in the plumping process. This is something I just talked to a friend about on Instagram, is that I have really focused in my diet on eating more dietary fats. And when I do, when I'm eating half of an avocado a day or a little bacon, don't judge, I can tell a total difference in my skin. When I'm getting a lot of more omegas, I started taking fish oil, and I can't stress enough, like the 2 points that they make here are great. Like water-rich foods and getting enough omegas, like so key. So then as you scroll down, they get into some of the care habits that we do to our skin that can contribute to dryness or dehydration. And one of the things is cleansing your face. And what's interesting is, you know, of course everybody wants to talk about a pH balanced cleanser, but you know what's really worked for me, and I've mentioned this several times before, is using soap. Using artesian crafted facial soap has really worked well for my skin. And so I'm gonna be doing a video coming up here the second weekend in September. I want to be doing a video on soap because I believe in it so much, and it's made such a huge difference in my skin. And I feel like there's now that I've been studying soap, I feel like there's so much confusion about using soap on your face, and so much fear when I don't know, I just find soap to be fabulous. And then that's it. So do you have any thoughts or comments that you want to share? That was a really great article. I think it brings up some great points, and you know, if you want to check in with it. But again, don't stop drinking that water. Don't stop getting that green juice. That it does make a difference. It does make a difference. No matter what anyone wants to tell you, it does make a difference. And the anatomy speaks for itself. And of course, I agree with both the things the doctor said in here. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a great week.